I've collected 6 of the most disturbing real encounters people have shared online, and I wish I never read them. A man sprinting toward you on an empty trail, glassy eyes, not scared of something, just completely unhinged. She was alone in her van, middle of nowhere. Then she looked under it, and someone was already there, looking back. 3 knocks, 2:30 a.m., every single night, but the footprints in the snow never led away from the door. He woke up at 3 a.m. to find a man outside his window, standing completely still, with a smile too wide to be human. 6 true stories, 6 people who survived. Watch till the end, if you think you can handle all of them. Subscribe. The next one might be worse. Story 1. It was just this past fall. I live fairly close to a lot of camping areas and trails, so I went for a lot of hiking and camping trips, and often didn't even plan them. I'd find a trail real quick, pack my things, and head out the next morning. This was another one of those quick, spontaneous camping trips that I never could have expected to become what it did. When I pulled up to the trailhead, about an hour from my small town, no cars were there. I locked up my car and threw my backpack over my shoulders and started the hike. The woods were just as quiet as they always were, no signs of anyone out there. My head was clear and I was just looking at the ground, walking calmly down the trail, when suddenly I heard crunches and cracks ahead. I looked up, seeing something move in the trees far down the trail I was on. As they got closer, I saw it was a man coming quickly down the trail, and when he got even closer, I got sort of uncomfortable. He wasn't just jogging, this guy was in a dead sprint. I moved off to the side to get out of his way. I watched him as he sprinted past me. He had this look on his face that was hard to read, not frightened necessarily, but just sort of crazy, like he wasn't thinking straight. His eyes seemed to be glazed over like he was looking through me, almost like he didn't even see me. I watched him for a couple seconds after he passed by, and he just continued running, so I got back on the trail and started walking again. It was so strange though that after maybe 30 seconds, I did a double take and looked behind me again. I felt my stomach drop. The man was far down the trail, but he had stopped running. He was standing still, staring right at me. I quickly moved my eyes back forward and kept walking, scared to look back until another 30 seconds had passed. And when I did, he was gone. Not on the trail, not anywhere, just gone. Obviously, I wanted to get away from that guy because he was acting pretty unsettling, especially for being out here alone with him. But after a few minutes of walking further down the trail and into the woods, I started to wonder if he was running from something, and if I was walking toward whatever it was. However, my only other option would have been to turn back and go in the direction of the guy who kind of freaked me out. And again, he didn't really look scared of something, he just looked crazy. So I took my chances and continued hiking to the campsite. I looked behind me every couple of minutes, still uneasy about that guy, but I didn't see any signs of him. I made it to the campsite and set my stuff up. There wasn't really anything distinguishing about the campsite I was at. It really was just a spot in the middle of the trees. No campfire rings or landmarks, and usually the quiet, soft sounds of the forest would bring me peace. But this time, it felt too quiet, like something was out there. I continuously wondered if I had made the right choice to stay here rather than turning back. I kept telling myself the man might have just been doing sprints for a workout or something, and I just overanalyzed everything. But really, I knew I was just hoping if I told myself that over and over, maybe I'd start to believe it. The sun got lower, and the already calm and quiet woods grew even quieter, nearly silent. Every slight rustle of leaves in the distance was easily audible. I cleared out a spot and built up a very small campfire, giving me at least a bit of light once the sun was fully gone. It had to be an hour past sundown when I heard a very familiar sound that instantly made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Footsteps sprinting through the woods, maybe 100 yards out from the campsite. Too far to see anything, but I was sure it was human footsteps, not just some animal. Each step was distinct. The sound stopped after just a short burst though, like they had run a little ways, then abruptly came to a stop, and it was silent again. I thought the campfire would give me comfort, but now it just felt like it was giving me away, showing exactly where I was and making me easy to spot. And even though whoever was out there likely already saw me, in the heat of the moment, I made the horrible decision to quickly smother the fire. Suddenly, it was pitch black. I stood still, waiting for any sounds, hoping to hear the person walk away or even run away. I didn't care as long as they left. Every minute that passed just got me more nervous though. And then, it happened again. Someone sprinting, but this time directly toward my campsite, much closer. But then, they abruptly stopped again. It felt like they were so close, nearly right in front of me. I stared at the same spot in the darkness where the sound came from, until my eyes slowly adjusted and could make out the shape of a figure standing there. The person was halfway behind a tree, standing still, and I couldn't see much details of their face, but from the way they stood and were clearly looking at me, it was almost like they were observing me. Nothing a normal person would be doing, and I really couldn't tell if it was a man or woman, but I was pretty sure it wasn't the same guy I saw running on the trail. So, either there were multiple people running around out here surrounding my campsite, or this is what the man was running from. I was scared to move. I didn't want to speak either, because I knew my voice would be shaky, and I didn't want to give away just how scared I was. It felt like both of us stood motionless, staring at each other for a whole minute, until the figure started backing up. Even just a couple steps back, they had entirely disappeared in the darkness, and just as eerie, their footsteps quietly faded too. They must have been quietly walking barefoot, intentionally not making a sound. Since the moment the figure moved away, it stayed silent for a long time. My adrenaline pumping made it hard to tell just how long. It felt like hours, but realistically, I think it was probably around 30 minutes. I didn't move for that whole time. When I finally did, I knew I had to leave. I blindly dug through my backpack and got my light out, then started taking down my tent. I stayed cautious while taking it down and repacking everything. The light I had wasn't great, really, just enough to see what I was doing. Definitely not enough to be searching around for the person in the woods. They could have easily been just 15 or 20 feet from my campsite still. I didn't know what intentions they had, but I hoped by leaving and not looking threatening, they would leave me alone. I started back down the trail. Although I never saw anyone again or heard any more footsteps, knowing how silent they were moving near my campsite, I was still on edge, and they very well could have been following me. Even just that thought of them creeping behind me, following me through the woods, was enough to keep my adrenaline going through the whole trail. When I got to my car, I quickly got in and drove out of the forest, not sticking around for a second longer than I had to. And it wasn't actually until the following day that I noticed some scratches on my car door, and the handle on the passenger side was broken, like it had been pulled on so hard that the latch snapped and left the handle unusable. That was the final nail in the coffin to get me to call the police. But aside from my report, it led to nothing significant. I don't know if it was the man I saw that tried to get into my car, or if it was whoever was out in the woods watching me. That single event derailed my whole love for camping, which really sucks. But with all the possibilities of what could have happened that night in the forest, I don't think I'll ever be out there alone ever again. Story 2. I was backpacking alone through a state forest. This area and whole trail really was regulated to where it had designated campsites that you had to reserve. However, it was a long trail, I think 80 miles if you were to backpack the whole thing. So, as far as how often any rangers came through to service it, it was probably very rarely. The designated campsites were more for bare safety and just keeping the forest clean, as well as to ensure there's a record of how many people are out in the wilderness and for how long. Regardless, I did my due diligence and reserved 2 campsites, one at the 12-mile mark and another at the 26-mile mark. All the individual sites were very spread out, so I think the closest ones to me were a mile or so away. I made the long hike up to the first campsite, arriving midday and resting for the rest of the afternoon. During my hike and the time I spent at the campsite along the trail, I never saw a single other hiker or backpacker. It was off-season, so I wasn't surprised. but it was something I just took note of. I went to bed early and slept well that night, only waking up once to what I thought were footsteps coming down the trail. I don't remember much of it because I fell right back asleep afterward, but I know I thought it was strange anyone was walking the trail that late. It was probably 2 or 3 a.m., but it didn't bother me enough to ruin my sleep. I woke up early, had breakfast and a cup of coffee, then packed and headed to the next campsite. The trail was as empty as it was the previous day. This hike was 4 miles longer though, further and deeper into the forest and with more elevation, which meant I didn't make it to the next campsite until late. The sun hadn't gone down yet, but by the time I had my tent up and my fire going, it was getting dark. I still hadn't seen anyone that whole day, which at that point, it was a little strange just how inactive it was. I tried to just enjoy the silence while I had the chance though. Several hours went by. I didn't have any hiking to do tomorrow, so I was staying up later. I think it was 9 or maybe 10 o'clock when I heard footsteps far down the trail from the way I came. Right when I turned around, I saw a light too, just a small headlight moving in between all the trees getting closer to my campsite. I thought it was pretty crazy for anyone to still be hiking several hours past sundown, and immediately made the connection to the person I'd heard walking last night as well. Although if it were the same person, I would have had to have passed them at some point. So, how did I not see them? I figured it was nothing, but still was curious enough to keep watching the light. The person got closer until suddenly the light stopped moving. It looked almost like the light was facing toward me, and then a couple seconds later, it moved and veered off the trail, going into the forest away from my camp, and maybe 20 seconds later, it turned off. No light or footsteps anymore. It felt like just when the person had gotten close enough to see me or my campfire, they tried to vanish, like they didn't want anyone to see them, which was kind of concerning. Had the person just have passed by, I would have still thought it was strange for all the other reasons, but not concerning. What the hell could they possibly be going off the trail for in the middle of the night and turning off their headlamp? Not to mention, it was just when they had gotten in view of my campfire. I kept looking in that direction for, I don't know, had to be 15 or 20 minutes, but after the light shut off, I didn't see anything. I guess I thought after so much time had passed, the person likely set up a small campsite somewhere out there just to sleep. Maybe they had reserved a camp a couple miles north and started running behind. So, with it being late, they just stopped for the night. Coincidentally, right near me. It still didn't explain the night before, but there was no way to know if it was the same person. An hour passed. I'm not sure why I was still awake tending to the campfire. I didn't get tired for some reason, like my body wanted me to stay up, so I listened to it and stayed awake. Whatever the reason, I'm thankful for it, because suddenly I heard something behind me. It was a very quiet crunch of leaves just beyond my camp, like a person trying their best to take a silent footstep. It was close too, way too close for comfort. I jumped up and looked out, but couldn't see anything. Whoever was out there immediately stopped moving. I quickly reached into my bag and pulled out my flashlight, shining it straight into the forest. Standing eerily close, just 10 yards from me, there was a man. Right away, I noticed he didn't look at all like a hiker or backpacker. The guy had normal clothes and no backpack, and strangely, he didn't move when I shined the light on him, like he hoped I still somehow didn't see him. Wasn't until I called out, "What the hell are you doing?" that he hesitated like he was about to run, but then decided to just walk toward me. His face grew into a smile, and as he got closer, something was off. Something was familiar. I recognized him from somewhere, but I didn't know where. And then, he said my name, greeting me like we were good friends. And although I was sure I'd seen this guy somewhere before, I knew that I'd never talked to him or introduced myself or anything like that. Like I'd only seen him in passing or something and nothing more. So, how did he know my name? And why was he out here creeping around my camp? I realized whoever this was had been following me, not just tonight, but the last several nights, long enough to have followed me all the way out to the trail and into the forest, which explains why he didn't look like a backpacker at all. He'd likely been trailing behind far enough that I'd never notice him, and then would walk around at night looking for me when he thought I'd be asleep. The man was still smiling and walking closer, as everything came together in my head in just those few seconds. He said my name again, this time saying it as if confused why I was acting so scared. I backed up and grabbed my bag. The man's face fell flat, and he asked what I was doing now in a monotone voice. I didn't answer. Strapping my backpack on and moving toward the trail, he said my name one more time in an aggressive yell, before his footsteps started getting quicker. I bolted down the trail, keeping my light off to try and lose him, but thankfully, he didn't seem to try and chase for very long, running on the trail behind me for 15 seconds, but never really leaving the campsite. I walked through the entire night and used my satellite emergency phone to contact authorities while I tried to get as far away as possible. Eventually, meeting a park ranger several miles away from the camp I stayed at on the first night. I got out safely after that, but they never found the guy out there. He didn't have a car at the trailhead and no reservations. However, for him to get out of that forest unseen, he would have had to hike off trail probably for dozens of miles in the right direction. And in a forest like that with almost no gear, that's incredibly difficult and honestly unlikely to survive even for an experienced backpacker, let alone for some random stalker who followed me out there and likely had no real backpacking experience. But given that I still have no idea who he is other than someone that I'd seen sometime before, it's terrifying knowing that if he did make it out, then he could still be watching me. Who knows? Story 3. A few years ago, I was in between jobs and not having all that much to do. I thought I'd rent a camper van and go on a long extended vacation. I ran all the numbers, and while I could have used my savings and flown somewhere nice for a week, with a van I could take a 3 or 4 week vacation. And I wasn't a city person either. I loved nature and wanted to get out and try camping in a slightly safer and more accessible way. I didn't know how I'd feel or if I'd be comfortable being alone in the middle of nowhere with just a tent, but being in a secure metal box with the ability to drive away felt like it'd be better, at least for my first couple of times. Anyway, I got the van and headed north to where all the national forests and free public lands for camping were. The first couple of days of traveling, I ended up staying the night at truck stops just to sleep and continue driving. I think I was trying a little too hard to have my first campsite be some spectacular place, rather than just paying for a nice campground or something where I could settle in and figure out exactly what I was doing. But it was on my third day that I finally had a chance to camp in the wilderness. I was on a long stretch of road with nothing but public lands for miles in all directions. There was an app I was using to try to find campsites others had stayed at, and I had a few marked on my GPS just in case one didn't work out. But what I didn't plan for was that none of them did. Every time I'd reach one of the spots, there was nothing there. No trail, no other campers, just nothing. I must have driven an hour on this unpaved, rugged road, failing to find any of the campsites I'd picked out. I began getting frustrated, knowing I was getting really far away and it was getting late. I felt like I was racing against the sun because I knew once it was down, finding one of the seemingly invisible trails would be impossible. I couldn't even go on the app to look up different nearby campsites either because I no longer had service. I would have had to drive an hour back just to find some more campsites that might not even be there. So, I kept driving, and after a while, I happened to barely see a path leading away from the main road. I was already 30 minutes past all the campsites I had marked, and this was the first trail that I'd found. It looked even more rugged than the current road I was on, but the van could definitely fit. And while I couldn't check the app to see if this was a campsite others had stayed at, I figured it had to be, as it was connected to the same road that all the other ones were supposedly on. I backed up and pulled onto the trail. My headlights lit up the way as I slowly drove through the trees and down the path. It went on for about 5 minutes, and then I reached the end. Just a single small spot, barely large enough for the van to fit in. There were no other little paths going to different campsites. It was just this one, which to me, for my first time being out in the wilderness, was unsettling. I hoped wherever I'd stay would have other campers nearby, just so I'd feel comfortable. Being entirely alone just felt a bit much for my first time. I stayed parked for a few minutes, sitting in the front seat still and looking out into the woods. There was this really dreadful feeling in me about this place. I hated how alone I felt, and my gut was telling me to leave, that something wasn't right. On any other normal day, I would have pulled out, reassessed, and found somewhere else to go. But I was so frustrated that I just settled. I also thought since it was my first time being out here, maybe my mind was panicking more than it should be, simply because I was out of my comfort zone. I turned off the van and moved to the back. It was already dark out, so there wasn't much I could do outside of the van until the morning. I laid on the bed for a minute to relax after the drive, but then I heard crunching steps outside the van, and before I could even get up, there was a loud knock at the driver's side window. I'd only been there for a few minutes, so I was sure it had to be another camper. I must have missed them while driving down, or just didn't see the other campsite. I walked up to the front and saw a man standing by the door, peering through the window at me. He gave a short, sort of awkward, not trying to bother you smile. I asked if everything was okay. He said yeah, that his name was Mike, and he just wanted to swing by and say hello to his neighbor before it got too dark. Now, of course I was new to all of this, so I wasn't sure if this was common courtesy or what. A few things struck me as strange though. One is that I still had no idea where he was camping, or how he was this close to where I was. And two is that it was already dark out. The sun had been down for a while. Lastly, the man was very twitchy, shifting around a lot, and his eyes constantly darted over my shoulder, like toward the opening into the back of the van, kind of like he was expecting or waiting to see someone else come up behind me, which just made me more nervous about being alone. I said, "Thanks for stopping by," being nice, but trying to cut off the conversation because of the weird feeling I was getting. As I started to back away from the window, I noticed the man didn't move. He kept his feet planted and watched me move into the back of the van. I waited 15 seconds before peeking through the curtain, and when I did, he wasn't there. Immediately, I started looking out the smaller windows around the van, looking for any lights or something to show me where his campsite was, or even where he walked off to. Surely, he had a lantern or flashlight to walk through the woods with. I was able to look out pretty much every side of the van, and I didn't see any lights at all, or see him walking around anywhere. The trees surrounding my van were all dark and quiet, no signs of a camp being nearby. I thought about leaving again, because of course it didn't feel great being alone in the middle of the woods with this guy that gave me a strange feeling. But I thought if I could just see where he went, or where he was staying, I'd feel a lot safer, like he wouldn't be able to sneak up on me so easily next time. Story 4. A couple years ago, I decided to do a last-minute solo hike in a forest preserve a few towns away from where I lived. It wasn't some deep wilderness trail or anything extreme, but it was remote enough that once you got a few miles in, you stopped hearing roads and stopped seeing other people. That was the whole appeal to me. I wanted a quiet day alone, just walking, clearing my head, and getting out of the house. I got there later than I should have, sometime in the afternoon. The parking area only had one other car in it, an older pickup truck with mud all over the sides. I remember noticing it because it looked out of place, like it had been driven hard through back roads. I didn't think much of it at the time. I parked, grabbed my bag, and started down the trail. The first hour was normal, quiet woods, occasional birds, nothing strange. I passed one empty picnic area and a small creek crossing, then kept going deeper. I never saw another person. After a while though, I started to get that subtle feeling that someone was behind me. Not footsteps exactly, just one of those instincts you get when you've been alone too long and suddenly don't feel alone anymore. A few times I stopped and looked back. Nothing, just the trail bending through the trees. Eventually, I reached a clearing with an old shelter near the edge of it. It looked abandoned, just a rotting wooden structure with graffiti on one side and a rusted metal grill nearby. I sat there for maybe 10 minutes, drinking water and checking my phone, even though I had no signal. That's when I heard a whistle. It was short, just one note. I looked up immediately. No one was in the clearing with me. At first, I thought maybe it was a bird, but a few seconds later, I heard it again. Same exact note, same pitch. This time it sounded farther off, somewhere back in the woods behind the shelter. I packed up and left right away. I didn't run or anything, but I started walking much faster than before. About 5 minutes later, I heard the whistle again. Same note, still somewhere behind me. That's when it started to feel deliberate. I stepped off the trail for a second and stood completely still, listening. The woods were silent. Then, from somewhere to my right this time, I heard a branch snap, not the random sound of a deer moving around. It sounded heavy, like a person stepping wrong and breaking a dead limb under their foot. I got back on the trail and kept moving. As I went, I started noticing little things that made the whole situation worse. Fresh mud on the path, in places that hadn't been there earlier. A crushed water bottle just off the side of the trail. A cigarette butt, still dry, even though the ground around it was damp. Signs that somebody had been near me recently, maybe even watching from the woods while I passed. At one point, I rounded a bend and froze. There was a backpack sitting in the middle of the trail, just sitting there. It was an old black hiking pack, dirty and half unzipped, like someone had dropped it and never came back for it. I didn't touch it. I stepped around it and kept going. But after about 30 seconds, I looked back over my shoulder. The backpack was gone. I stopped walking completely and stared at the empty trail behind me. There was no way I'd imagined where it was. It had been in the middle of the path. There was nowhere it could have gone unless someone had picked it up. And I hadn't heard a thing. That was the moment I knew for sure. Somebody was out there with me. I started jogging. The trail back to the parking lot was longer than I remembered, every few seconds. I glanced behind me, expecting to see someone step out from the trees. I didn't, but twice. I heard that same whistle again. Each time, a little closer. Then I heard something else. My own name. Quiet at first, almost like the wind had shaped it wrong. Then again, clearer this time. My name. From somewhere in the woods to my left. I stopped dead. There was no chance this was random anymore. No chance it was an animal. Or my imagination. Somebody knew I was out there, and somehow, they knew my name. I started moving again, faster than before. I didn't call back. I didn't ask who it was. I just kept going until the trail widened, and I could finally see the parking area through the trees. That should have made me feel better. It didn't, because when I stepped into the parking lot, my car was the only one there. The muddy pickup truck was gone, but there was something tucked under my windshield wiper. A folded piece of paper. My hands were shaking when I opened it. It only had 4 words written on it. You walk too slowly. I got in my car and left so fast. I nearly backed into a post. I drove straight to the nearest gas station and sat there for almost 20 minutes before I could calm down enough to call the police. They took a report, but nothing came of it. They searched the preserve later that day and didn't find anyone. No abandoned backpack. No one matching any description, because I never actually saw the person following me. Just the signs they left behind. I never went back there. The worst part came a few weeks later when I was cleaning out my hiking bag. One of the side pockets, the one I never use, had something in it that definitely hadn't been there before. A single cigarette butt, still smelling fresh. Story 5, The Knock That Knew My Name. This happened 3 winters ago when I was living alone in a small rental house just outside a town in northern Pennsylvania. It was one of those places where the nearest neighbor was maybe half a mile away, and the road only saw a few cars a day. I liked the isolation. I worked remotely, kept mostly to myself, and the quiet helped me focus. At least it did, until the knocking started. The first time it happened was around 2:30 in the morning. I woke up to a very clear knock on the front door. Not loud, just 3 slow knocks. Knock, knock, knock. At first I thought I had dreamed it, but then it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. I grabbed my phone and checked the time. 2:34 a.m. My heart started racing because no one I knew would ever show up at my house at that hour, especially in the middle of winter. I walked quietly to the window beside the door and peeked through the curtain. No one was there. The porch light was on. The driveway was empty. Snow covered everything outside, and the road beyond my yard was completely dark. I waited there for another minute. Nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it must have been a branch hitting the door or something shifting in the wind. I went back to bed and fell asleep again. The next night, it happened again. Same time. 2:30 a.m. 3 knocks. This time I jumped out of bed immediately and ran to the window. Again. The porch was empty, but something was different now. There were footprints in the snow. They started in the middle of the night and went straight to the front door. But there were no footprints leading away. Just one set of prints, stopping right at my doorstep. I opened the door quickly, expecting someone to be hiding against the wall or crouched beside the steps. No one was there. The footprints just ended. I stared at them for a long time before going back inside and locking the door again. After that night, I started sleeping with the lights on. 2 nights later, it happened again. 3 knocks. 2:30 a.m. This time, I didn't even check the window. I stayed frozen in my bed, listening. After about 10 seconds, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A voice, soft and quiet, right outside the door. Hello? It sounded like a man. Then a pause. Then he said my name. I sat straight up in bed. There was no way someone should know my name out there. I had barely lived in that house for 2 months and didn't know anyone in the area. The voice spoke again, still calm, almost polite. I know you're in there. I didn't move. I didn't answer. I just sat there staring at my bedroom door, waiting. Another long silence passed. Then I heard footsteps slowly walking across the wooden porch. 1 step, then another. Then they stopped directly under my bedroom window. The voice spoke again, louder this time. You should open the door. My entire body felt numb. I stayed completely still, barely even breathing. A few seconds passed, then something tapped on my bedroom window. Not a knock, just a slow tap, like someone lightly touching the glass. That was the moment I finally grabbed my phone and called the police. They arrived about 20 minutes later. By the time they got there, the porch was empty. The snow was untouched, no footprints anywhere in the yard. Nothing, just like the previous night. But before they left, one of the officers asked me something strange. He asked if I had checked the back door. I told him no. We walked around the house together, and he shined his flashlight at the back porch. There were scratches all over the door, long ones, like someone had been dragging their fingernails across it, and right beneath the window was something I hadn't noticed before. A small piece of paper taped to the glass. 4 words written in messy handwriting. You didn't answer me. I moved out of that house 2 weeks later, but sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I still think I hear those 3 knocks. Slow, patient, waiting. Knock, knock, knock. Story 6. The man standing outside my window. This happened about 4 years ago when I was living in a small town in Missouri. It wasn't a big city at all, Just one of those quiet places where everyone knows each other and nothing really happens. The kind of place where people don't even lock their doors most nights. At the time, I was renting a small house near the edge of town. Behind my backyard was a stretch of woods that went on for miles. During the day, it was actually pretty peaceful. I used to sit on the back porch with coffee and watch deer walk through the trees. But at night, those woods felt completely different. One night, I woke up suddenly around 3 a.m. I didn't know why. The house was silent, but something had pulled me out of sleep, like an alarm going off in my head. I rolled over and checked my phone. 3:07 a.m. Then I heard it, a soft crunch outside, like someone stepping on gravel. My bedroom window faced the backyard, and the gravel path ran right past it toward the shed. At first, I assumed it was a raccoon, or maybe a deer wandering too close to the house. But then I heard another step, slow, heavy, human. I stayed completely still in bed, listening. Another crunch, then silence. I slowly turned my head toward the window. The blinds were half open, and someone was standing there. A man, right outside the glass. At first, I couldn't even process what I was seeing. My brain kept trying to tell me it was a tree shadow or something in the yard. But then he moved slightly, and the porch light from the back of the house caught part of his face. He was just standing there, looking straight into my room, looking at me. I froze. We were maybe 6 feet apart, with nothing but a thin pane of glass between us. He didn't knock. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, staring, and the worst part was his expression. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even smiling. His face was completely blank, like he had been standing there for a long time just watching me sleep. I slowly reached for my phone on the nightstand without breaking eye contact. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The moment my hand touched the phone, the man's head tilted slightly to the side. Then he smiled. Not a normal smile, it was wide. Too wide, like someone forcing their face into a grin. I immediately dialed 911. While the phone rang, the man lifted his hand slowly and pressed his palm against the window. I could see how dirty his fingers were. His nails looked dark and jagged. Then he tapped the glass twice. Tap, tap. I whispered to the dispatcher that someone was outside my house. I couldn't stop shaking. The dispatcher asked if the person was trying to break in. I said no. He was just standing there, watching me. The man kept staring while I spoke on the phone. It felt like minutes passed, even though it was probably only 30 seconds. Then something strange happened. His smile disappeared. His eyes shifted slightly, past me, like he was looking deeper into the room. His expression changed from calm to confused. Then suddenly he stepped backward away from the window. 1 step, 2 steps. Then he turned and walked into the woods behind my house, just disappeared between the trees. The police arrived about 10 minutes later. They searched the woods with flashlights but didn't find anyone. No footprints, no sign someone had been out there. But one officer asked me something before they left. He asked if I had any roommates. I told him no. Then he asked if anyone else had been in the bedroom when the man was looking inside. I said no again. He looked uneasy when I answered, because when they checked the backyard with their flashlights, they only found 1 set of footprints. They started right outside my bedroom window, and they went toward the woods, meaning whoever that man was, he hadn't walked across my yard to get there. It was like he had already been standing outside my window for a long time, and something inside my room had finally scared him away.